I knew something was wrong when the executive assistant, who usually wouldn't dare make eye contact without a Slack notification, popped her gum and said, "Your brother wants to see you." Like, now, no please, no Miss Holloway. Just a chewed-up command floating over her acrylic nails. I walked past the framed article that called me the unseen architect of the Holloway framework, past the server blueprints I hand-drew in 2011 with coffee stains still tattooed on the margins. Straight into the conference room where my little brother, Chase, sat in my father's chair like he'd earned it. Spoiler alert, he hadn't. He had that MBA glow, new suit, empty eyes, and a PowerPoint open on a tablet he didn't know how to charge. "Rebecca," he said, gesturing like a guy about to sell me a gym membership, "we need to pivot." Then he smiled. That smug, PR-smoothed grin he learned from networking seminars and YouTube clips. "You're not strategic enough anymore. We need visionary thinkers. You're operational, maintenance. You're better suited for people initiatives, culture stuff. You know, employee wellness, vibes. This empire was built on my insomnia and server-side duct tape, and now I was being exiled to pass out branded yoga mats." He tapped his screen like it did something. "Look, don't make it weird. Think of it as a promotion sideways. We need someone to own emotional KPIs. You want me to measure feelings? I want you to get out of the way." There it was, not even gift-wrapped, just a shovel full of corporate dirt to bury me quietly. I looked at him, this man who still called me to ask what VPN stood for, and I realized he actually thought he won something. Like a golden goose he just duct-taped to a rocket. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't remind him who patched our systems during Hurricane Gloria from a motel Wi-Fi on a laptop missing the S key. I just stood up, walked back to my office and started packing. Only took me 7 minutes. My life fit into a filing box and a backup drive. I left the framed photo of me and Dad wiring the first server cage. He'd need a souvenir when this place caught fire. And then, from the back of the third drawer in my credenza, under a tangle of old Cat 5 cables and a stress ball shaped like a brain, I pulled it out. A tarnished brass key with a red tag so faded it looked pink. No label, no note, just weight. Cold, heavy, permanent. I placed it on Chase's desk without a word. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, what the hell kind of key? Good, keep thinking. And if you're one of those lovely folks listening to this story while folding laundry, making lunch, or questioning your entire career path, hit that like button and subscribe. Seriously, 90% of y'all don't, and it makes the team question our KPIs. Plus, it tells the algorithm we matter more than Chase's haircut. Anyway, as I walked out of the office for the last time, I could hear him in the distance asking, "What's this for?" Like a kid finding a cassette tape in a tech museum. I didn't turn around, let him guess. The receptionist glanced at the box in my hands and asked if I needed help. I said no. What I needed was already done. Chase thought he'd pushed me out of my own kingdom, but all he'd done was unlock a door he'd never even seen. The key was never the point. The key was just the fuse. They came in like a car commercial, loud, shiny, and useless in the snow. A caravan of consultants in skinny suits and confidence too big for the building. New infrastructure visionaries Chase hired were all buzzwords and bloatware. One had a drone follow him into the office. Another tried to order oat milk from the server room. I wish I were joking. Their first act of brilliance? Scrapping the legacy systems I'd spent 15 years reinforcing. Too old school, they said. We need elastic scalability. Translation: burn the foundation to build a foam castle. They tore apart my team, restructured DevOps into a Slack channel and a prayer, and handed off all critical architecture to a third-party firm called NetVibeX. Sounded like a nightclub. It was actually a Delaware LLC with a call center in Manila and a server room that doubled as a storage closet for scented candles. Again, not joking. My department dismantled. My team laid off or reassigned to meaningless roles. My lead sysadmin, Harold, who could spin up a backup node blindfolded, was sent to employee engagement. He now hosted weekly Zoom trivia nights. I didn't protest, not once. I just watched, made notes, logged everything. There's a type of silence people forget to fear, the kind that doesn't scream, doesn't negotiate. The kind that just remembers. They changed IP schema without verifying subnet permissions. They migrated our internal routing table to a cloud interface that couldn't recognize half the MAC addresses. At one point, I watched a guy named Bryce confidently delete a deprecated file labeled root router MAP final actual XML. Then he high-fived a guy who wore his AirPods backwards. They didn't understand the core routing logic, because I didn't name it like something you could find. I buried our fail-safes behind layers of legacy scripts that only someone who understood why they existed would recognize. Call it paranoia, call it foresight, but there was one protocol even I forgot existed until I checked an old Git backup from 2013. That's when I saw it, control layer Zeta. A buried routine nested inside the fallback pathing stack. A warning popped up when a junior IT tech tried to modify something in the cron scheduler. System flagged the change as potential custodian violation escalation logged. He screenshotted it, sent it to the new CTO with a note that just said, "What's control layer Zeta?" The CTO replied with a thumbs up emoji, and that was that. No one traced the escalation log. No one opened the system history. No one cross-checked the file name with the physical storage manifest. I did, though. I still had admin shadow access to the backend terminal. Quiet as a ghost. I watched them trip line after line like kids running through a minefield made of spaghetti code. One afternoon, I pulled a binder from my home filing cabinet. It was labeled Licensing Agreements 2012 to 2013. Buried inside, beneath an old receipt from a vending machine in Tulsa, was the clause, Failover Reversion Rights Custodian Class I, initialed by Dad, signed by Legal. Dated March 7, 2012. Was written in legalese so dry it could crack lips. In the event of unauthorized modification to Class I infrastructure by a non-custodian actor, all system-level administrative rights shall revert to the custodian of record. That'd be me. But Chase? He never read that contract. He barely understood how to change a printer cartridge without calling facilities. Now he was elbow-deep in a system whose foundations were rigged like a condemned building in a spy movie. So I kept watching, logging, documenting, because this wasn't sabotage, it was succession. It started with timestamps, not dramatic, not flashy, just off. One client in Munich noticed that their activity logs were drifting 6 minutes into the future. Not a big deal, unless you're running coordinated global shipping routes tied to down-to-the-minute inventory. Then Tokyo flagged a spike in failed API calls, mostly between 2:03 and 2:08 a.m. Eastern. The backend was throwing 402s and 500s like it was Mardi Gras. A UK finance client tried to sync their dashboard and got booted with an error that read, "Custodian check-in required." No one knew what that meant. The new CTO, some crypto bro with a LinkedIn full of self-congratulatory acronyms, told them it was probably a localization bug. Then he posted a motivational quote about leadership and went to a spin class. By the end of the week, clients were pissed. Not angry, concerned. That brand of calm, corporate dread that smells like a lawsuit and sounds like, we're evaluating options. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet, silent as bad code in production. I wasn't watching everything, just the pressure points. The old load balancer I'd built back in 2014 was still wired to a heartbeat ping that triggered every 6 hours. It was failing, not crashing, just stuttering, like it was hesitating, like it remembered who it used to report to. They couldn't see it, of course. The consultants were using flashy dashboards that showed 99.99% uptime. But the truth was buried beneath 6 layers of modern abstraction. Underneath all that was a skeletal framework held together by the logic I'd written, logic that didn't like being poked without permission. Then came the call from Mistral Ventures. They were one of our crown jewel clients, a logistics conglomerate with contracts in 42 countries and the patience of a toddler on espresso. Chase took the video call standing, trying to project confidence, shirt ironed within an inch of its life, teeth whiter than his resume was honest. I watched the call replay later because I still had access to the internal meeting archive. They never disabled my clearance, too many other fires. The Mistral rep didn't yell, he didn't threaten. He just calmly said, if your platform can't stabilize by next quarter, we'll have no choice but to explore alternative providers. Chase smiled and said, of course, we're already modernizing backend protocols and deploying agile infrastructure solutions, which meant absolutely nothing, like feeding buzzwords into a wood chipper and throwing the mulch at a boardroom. What did mean something was what came out of the security audit later that day. See, after the Mistral threat, Chase finally demanded answers from his new tech team. They spun up a full internal scan of system anomalies, and that's when it got interesting. Buried in the access logs was a pattern. A recurring credential pinging heartbeat checks, triggering test pings, and accessing subdirectories that didn't technically exist anymore. The credential ID? RML Custodian 0 when they flagged it as a potential ghost account left over from a legacy test environment. Something from the pre-consolidation era, whatever that meant to them. They scrubbed through LDAP, OAuth tables, and federated access keys, but they couldn't locate the user. Because it wasn't a user. It was a designation. RML, Rebecca Marie Holloway. I'd created that credential over a decade ago, buried under a dummy shell labeled redundant maintenance logic, tied to a physical hardware key with no digital twin. They tried to delete it. They couldn't. Chase was furious, slammed the conference table and yelled something about rogue systems and unauthorized access. Legal whispered words like audit liability. The CTO said, it's probably nothing, we'll patch it. But the system didn't like patches. It wanted permission. Cracks were getting louder now. The empire wasn't shaking, it was remembering, and I wasn't in the building, I was in control. At exactly 9:00 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, right as Chase was preparing to live stream a vision alignment breakfast with some LinkedIn influencer they flew in from Scottsdale, the data center flatlined. No warning, no countdown, no thunderclap, just instant surgical silence. The Slack channels froze mid-message. Calendar invites vanished. Internal comms went dark. Client dashboards threw up error messages like a Vegas slot machine. Outbound APIs died on the vine. Our most sensitive operational environment, a labyrinth of server stacks and subnetted switches, folded in on itself like someone had pulled its soul through a straw. Chase thought it was a glitch. He turned to the nearest intern and said, "Reboot the mainframe." There was no mainframe. This wasn't 1984. The intern was crying. IT started yelling across the floor. Devs ran like bees after a kicked hive. Phones rang like an air raid siren. Someone yelled, "Why isn't the failover kicking in?" But there was no failover, not anymore. They'd stripped it out for modern efficiency. Backups were virtual, mirrored in the cloud, all tied to infrastructure logic that had just gone off-grid. The building's tension hit terminal velocity. People were pacing in circles. One guy threw up in a recycling bin. Another asked if it was ransomware. The CTO just kept refreshing a 404 screen and muttering, "That's not supposed to happen." Meanwhile, Chase finally noticed it, still sitting there, right on his desk, tarnished, mute, unblinking. The key, the same one I'd left behind 2 weeks ago, resting on the edge of his overpriced, underutilized standing desk like a cursed artifact no one had dared touch. Picked it up like it might bite him. Turned it over in his hand. No tag, no engraving, just cold brass and decades of meaning he didn't understand. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. No one could answer. So he grabbed the key, stormed down the hallway like a man who just discovered a ticking sound under his Tesla, and threw open the glass doors to legal. "Explain this," he barked, slamming the key onto the table. The oldest lawyer in the department, a man named Harris who still used a fountain pen and refused to sign anything without physically reading it, looked up from his notes. His eyes flicked to the key, then they didn't move. Seconds ticked by. He didn't speak. He didn't blink, just stared. "Harris?" Chase asked, now more confused than angry. The lawyer finally reached out, slowly, like he was touching the past. He picked up the key, turned it over, then turned pale. As in, full ghost mode. All the color gone from his face like the system had just drained him too. "This," he said, barely above a whisper, "this is from the 2010 schematic. Rebecca built the original vault with this key. It was the override for the first server cage. Back when the architecture was still physical hybrid, before virtualization." "What the hell does that mean?" Chase snapped. "It means," Harris said slowly, "you didn't just lose access. You violated the custodian covenant." Chase blinked. "What covenant?" Harris didn't answer. He stood up, walked to the filing wall, and pulled out a red-labeled binder that hadn't been touched in years. It was cracked at the spine. Inside, schematics, blueprints, hardwired root protocols. And at the very top, in ink fading but legible, was a page labeled, "Sysroot Escrow, Custodian Protocol Initiated. January 2010, Custodian of Record. Rebecca Marie Holloway." The schematic attached to the page. Detailed diagram of Vault A, showing physical lock points, biometric triggers, and a manual override slot that matched the exact dimensions of the key Chase now held in his sweating hands. Panic isn't always loud. Sometimes it hums. Sometimes it settles into a man's shoulders as he realizes he pressed the wrong switch, said the wrong name, burned the wrong bridge. Chase's mouth opened, then closed. His bravado dissolved like sugar in gasoline. He didn't know it yet. The company hadn't just gone offline. It had come home. The emergency board meeting was called within the hour. No coffee, no catered pastries, no pre-meeting small talk about traffic or pillates, or whatever coastal nonsense the consultants usually chirped about. Just grim faces, furrowed brows, and the low static of dread vibrating through every corner of that glass coffin they called the conference suite. Chase sat at the head of the table like a dethroned prom king still wearing the crown. His shirt was rumpled, his tie crooked. The key sat in front of him, untouched, as if proximity alone might detonate something. The CTO flanked him, sweaty and silent, tapping through dead dashboards on his tablet like they'd start working out of fear. At the other end of the table, Harris, the old lawyer, set down the red binder with the kind of reverence people usually reserve for holy texts or nuclear codes. Its cover read, "Sysroot Escrow, Custodian Protocol 2010 Holloway Systems." No one spoke as he opened it. No one breathed. The first page was yellowed at the edges but clear. Rebecca's signature, neat, unmistakable. Beneath it, the sharp, angular scrawl of our father's initials. A third space for reviewing counsel held Harris's own handwriting, time-stamped and notarized. He cleared his throat. This document was drafted in January 2010, when the company transitioned from Phase 1 hardware infrastructure into hybridized routing. At that time, per board instruction, Rebecca was designated custodian of all mission-critical architecture, physical and virtual. "What does that mean?" Chase snapped, voice cracking around the edges. In actual English. "It means," Harris replied, opening to the third tab, "that the custodian has administrative primacy in the event of unauthorized structural modification." He read aloud, slow and deliberate. Clause 7C. In the event of non-approved architectural modification to any Class I subsystem or root-level infrastructure without custodian sign-off, all controlling systems, including but not limited to routing tables, load balancers, client interfaces, and data vaults, shall revert to custodian oversight until such time that reauthorization is granted or the system is legally required under amended terms. Dead silence. Somewhere outside, an air vent groaned. So she booby-trapped it, one of the board members finally asked. No, Harris said. She protected it. Chase stood, the chair screeching behind him. Why the hell would Dad sign this? Why would anyone let her have that much control? Harris didn't answer right away. He turned the page. Behind it, a series of proprietary licensing records. Rebecca's name, listed as the sole license holder for a core module labeled CRL v.1.0 Core Routing Logic, custodian only. The description underneath was short but devastating. Required for all mission-critical operations. Cannot be replicated, sublicensed, or forked without custodian signature and biometric authorization. Translation: Rebecca owned the spine. She didn't just run the system. She was the system. Every flashy upgrade Chase had authorized, every rebrand, every consultant-led optimization, all of it still ran through the invisible veins of the core routing logic Rebecca had designed before his diploma ink dried. And none of them had read the clause that made her its guardian. A few more clicks and they would have triggered the cascade anyway. But Chase had fast-tracked everything, had gutted her team, had pulled out the wrong wire from the wrong port on the wrong day. And now the network was gone. The clients were leaving, and the only person who could fix it had already walked away with nothing but a key. Chase tried to play brave. Fine, so she has her name on some old files. We'll just re-engineer the system. Start fresh. Harris just shook his head slowly. You can't. She also holds the licensing rights for the compression engine we use to optimize throughput on client deliverables. It's patented under her LLC. You touch it without her, you're open to a 7-figure IP violation. That's assuming she doesn't sell it to Apex Dine first. I hear they've been courting her. That last line landed like a pipe bomb. Chase sat down again, but this time slower. He didn't speak. No one did, because now they all understood. This wasn't just a system failure. This was a reckoning, not loud, not violent, just written down, signed, sealed, and filed. Paper over power, authority through architecture. And the worst part, he handed it to her, with both hands. The air in the boardroom shifted the second the door opened. Not dramatically, no gust of wind, no echoing heels on tile, but subtly, like the room remembered it used to belong to someone else. People stopped pretending to check their phones. Laptops froze mid-click. The CTO flinched so hard he nearly knocked over his energy drink. And there I was. No dramatic entrance, no flanked lawyers. Just me in the same gray blazer I'd worn when I mapped the first server room, holding one thing, a manila folder with no logo, no label, no bravado. Just quiet, weighted intent. I didn't look at Chase. He was already staring, jaw set, eyes wild around the edges like he hadn't slept in 2 days. I imagine he expected me to come in swinging. But rage is loud. And I didn't come to make noise, I came to end it. I walked to the table with the same pace I used to walk down server aisles during overnight maintenance, measured, focused, calm. Not a single person greeted me. Not even Harris, though I saw him straighten his tie like a soldier seeing an old commander return. I placed the manila folder directly in front of the chairman, not Chase. The chairman was a man named Lowell. Always had a poker face that could survive a fire. But when he saw the words offer terms typed in all caps, size 12 courier, he looked up at me like he suddenly understood what century it was again. Thank you for joining us, he said, voice neutral. I nodded, of course. Chase finally found his voice. You didn't return my calls. No, I said, I didn't. You're seriously going to pull this stunt in front of the board? It's not a stunt, I replied, still not looking at him. It's contract enforcement. He scoffed, leaned back, arms crossed like a teenager grounded for crashing the family car. This is personal. No, I said again calmly. That's what you still don't understand. It's not personal. That's why it's working. Lowell opened the folder. Inside was a single typed page with 2 columns and a date at the bottom. The font was unassuming. The content was not. Column A, relicense terms under my newly formed LLC, Custody Logic Systems, 5-year contract, escalating annual fees. Full technical oversight reverts to me and my team. All prior licensing is null and void. Column B, refusal to engage, in which case Custody Logic is free to accept acquisition terms from Apex Dine, competitor already offering triple the licensing value in exchange for exclusive access to the core routing logic, and the proprietary load balancer routines Chase's team didn't even know existed until 48 hours ago. There was no column C. The board read it like scripture. Chase sat still, arms folded so tight his knuckles went pale. I could feel the heat rolling off him like a dying engine trying to start without fuel. May we take a recess to review this? Lowell asked. Of course, I said, sitting. Take all the time you need. But know this, every minute you wait, Apex Dine's offer increases. And their next round of funding clears Friday. That was true. I'd seen the term sheet. The CFO, a woman named Rajani who once called me the only person in this building who's never needed a second draft, looked up from the paper and asked, why now? I met her gaze. Because I was told I wasn't strategic. This is what strategy looks like. I didn't gloat. I didn't monologue. I sat there, hands folded, quiet as the system that bore my fingerprints. They wanted to outsource my brain and lease my legacy. I was offering to rent it back at interest. Across the table, Chase looked like a man realizing the will reading hadn't gone his way. I could feel the room shifting, loyalty cracking, power rerouting, and all I'd brought was a folder. The silence after I handed over the second envelope felt engineered, like the air itself paused to see if Chase would combust. Nobody reached for it, not at first, because this time the stakes weren't just implied. They were printed, stapled, and watermarked with the future. The chairman finally flipped it open. The logo on the back was small, tasteful, and lethal. Apex Dine, blue serif font. Understated but unmistakable. The boardroom's oxygen dipped by a measurable degree. I timed it intentionally. "Let me make it plain," I said, voice steady as a metronome. "There are two paths forward." I leaned in slightly, not dramatic, just enough to make sure every word landed like a contract clause with a sharp edge. Option A, Chase resigns effective immediately. The board appoints a transitional CEO. My LLC, Custody Logic Systems, licenses the architecture back to the company under the terms you've already reviewed. I will reinstate access within 12 hours of execution. Chase let out a bitter laugh. 12 hours? What are you, some kind of digital warlord now? No, I said. I'm the one who built the walls. You just painted over them with buzzwords and hoped they'd hold. He fell quiet. I continued. Option B, I walk out of this room and Apex Dine executes its offer. I get full IP ownership, exclusive access to the core routing logic, and license rights to the compression stack. They've already drafted onboarding for your top 5 enterprise clients. They've been reverse engineering your pricing models for 6 months. You won't just lose the system, you'll lose the war. I watched the color drain from the CFO's face as she calculated what that meant. It was worse than layoffs, worse than a PR hit. It was annihilation. Legal was already flipping through breach of contract clauses, whispering about force majeure and fiduciary failure. Rajani ran a risk projection on her laptop that showed an 87% client churn rate if Apex Dine announced the acquisition before Q4. Harris whispered something about dereliction of custodial duty. Chase just sat there, breathing like someone was pressing a fist into his chest. "This is blackmail," he muttered finally. "No," I said. "This is leverage. Blackmail is emotional. This is structural. You're not a hostage. You're just no longer useful." He stood up, arms trembling. "You're willing to torch everything just to get back at me?" "I don't want revenge, Chase," I said, locking eyes with him for the first time since I walked in. "I want competency. You tried to build an empire on a foundation you didn't understand. And then you fired the architect." The chairman cleared his throat. "Do we have a deadline for option A?" I nodded. "You have until 5 p.m. today. After that, Apex Dine goes public with the acquisition." He looked at Chase, then at the folder, then back at me. The boardroom wasn't debating if I'd win. They were debating how much it would cost to pretend I hadn't already. Chase opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Just air and regret. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was drowning in consequences. I leaned back in my chair and waited. Not angry, not smug, just surgical, like a system applying its final update. Chase stood up like a man still pretending the stage was his. One last performance. Shoulders squared, voice pitched somewhere between desperation and delusion. "This is insane," he said, pacing. "You're really going to let her gut the company because of some antique contract clause? She's my sister, for God's sake. Family. We're supposed to have each other's backs." That word family hung in the air like a bad smell. You could feel the collective reaction from the board. Involuntary, muted, embarrassed. Like someone brought their messy divorce into a quarterly earnings call. He kept going. "Dad built this company for us, for the next generation. You think he'd want her holding it hostage with lawyer tricks and antique server keys?" He gestured toward the envelope again like it might leap up and defend him. "She's not acting in the company's best interest. She's acting out. We should be closing new clients, building future-proof solutions, not playing out a sibling rivalry in front of legal." He looked around the table, searching for an ally. None looked back. It was the chairman who finally shut it down. "Chase." The word landed with more authority than anything Chase had said all morning. "You violated the custodian protocol. Unintentionally or not. The restructuring breached a binding legal agreement. That alone is grounds for executive dismissal. Add to that the IP exposure, system downtime, client loss risk, and looming acquisition threat." He paused. "You didn't just burn the bridge. You bulldozed the land it stood on." Chase tried again. "I didn't know. No one told me because you didn't ask." Harris cut in. "The binder was in the archive. The clause was on file. Authorized full DevOps rights without legal clearance. That was your signature, your initiative, your mess." Rajani spoke next, crisp and cold. "We've modeled both options. If we accept Rebecca's offer, we retain core functionality and 70% of current client contracts by year-end. If we reject it and Apex Dine moves forward, projected losses exceed $200 million in under 6 months." The number landed like a steel door slamming shut. That's when the chairman said the words that finished it. "I'm calling a vote. No theatrics, no drama, just 5 board members raising hands, one after another, like a firing squad with HR compliance." Chase looked around the room like a man who just realized the balcony he climbed onto wasn't attached to the building. "I've given everything to this company," he muttered. "Everything. You gave speeches, Rajani replied. She gave infrastructure. And that was it. The chairman looked at me. Miss Holloway, I held up a hand, quiet. I didn't want his thanks. I didn't need applause. This wasn't vindication. It was accounting. I watched Chase sit down slowly, the kind of slow that happens when a person's legs remember something their ego won't admit. It's over. He stared at the polished conference table like he expected it to split open and swallow him. He'd worn that stupid varsity smile for months, next-gen vision, orderly velocity, culture-forward thinking. Now it was gone. What sat in front of us was not a CEO, not a brother, not even a man with a plan. Just a boy who finally realized the game was real and he'd never read the rules. I didn't speak. I didn't smirk. I just watched. Because sometimes the most satisfying sound in the world is the silence that follows a collapse you didn't have to cause, just wait for. The vote concluded. 5 in favor, none against. 1 abstention, Chase, for what little it mattered. The chairman didn't bang a gavel or make some grand declaration. He just said, motion carries. Effective immediately, Chase Holloway is removed as CEO. Chase didn't stand, didn't protest. He just stared at the folder like it was a coffin lid nailed shut. His hands stayed limp in his lap. That gleaming confidence he wore like cologne had evaporated. All that was left was a hollowed-out man in a tailored suit, linking too slowly. No one clapped. No one congratulated me. I hadn't asked for that. I reached across the table and pulled the offer folder back toward me, flipping to the final page. I'll have the contract executed through custody logic by close of business. Licensing rate will be 5 times the original structure. Access is read-only unless explicitly elevated. All administrative keys route through me. Understood, the chairman said. And the CEO position. I closed the folder gently, not interested. A few surprised looks flickered around the table. I didn't entertain them. This was never about the chair, I added. I don't need a title to control the architecture. I just need signatures. Legal nodded. Harris looked relieved in that quiet way people do when they realize the fire is out but the walls are still standing. I stood, smoothed my jacket, and gathered my folder. Across the table, Chase was still seated. Eyes locked on me like he might speak, but no words came. He looked unhooked, like a man who finally noticed gravity. His access was already revoked. His keycards dead. His calendar cleared by the minute. He didn't ask for forgiveness. I wouldn't have offered it. On my way out, Harris reached into his briefcase and pulled out the envelope, the same one I'd left on Chase's desk weeks ago. The brass key was tucked inside now, its edges still cold, still sharp. Quietly, reverently, he sealed it shut and slid it into a drawer. The hallway outside was the same as I left it. Artificial plants, forced smiles, a receptionist who looked like she wanted to flee the building. I nodded once, she nodded back like she'd just seen a ghost walk out with the deed to the place. At the elevator, I paused, not because I second-guessed, just to breathe. I didn't feel triumphant. No rush, no spike of adrenaline or secret grin, just a strange calm. Like I'd finished a job no one else realized needed doing. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out as the elevator doors slid open. New email, Apex Dine Venture subject, updated acquisition proposal body. We're prepared to meet your terms in full. Let us know how you'd like to proceed. I smiled, just barely, not because I needed their offer, but because now, for the first time in a long time, I had choices. The empire didn't fall today. It just changed hands, quietly, completely, and the key was never just a key. It was a memory made of metal, a warning wrapped in brass. A door I never had to slam because some legacies are so deeply written into the walls. The system remembers who built it, even if the people forget. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.